Tola, thanks for taking out the time, effectively allowing us to take over Athlete Maestro on the eve of your 1000 episode. Good to be here.
Thank you for having me. I couldn't think of anybody better to run this, so
Yeah,
to speak.
it is it's special because look, I follow the podcast. I listen to as many episodes as I can, but as you can imagine, when it's 1,000, then it
Mm-hmm.
becomes a lot to
Mm-hmm.
listen to.
Yeah.
Look, we've talked about lots of things, and obviously in the years we've
Mm-hmm.
shared ideas on a couple of things. But first of all, I just wanted to read this out on your bio. Literally written is sports lawyer, mindset, and performance coach to athletes and sports parenting. But that's not where I want to start from. Where I want to start from is Tola, the person, who's Tola. Obviously, I know you personally,
Mm-hmm.
but what's your upbringing like?
That's actually a tough question. I was saying this before doing this, how I've never been on this side,
Right.
of the conversation. I'm always the one asking questions, trying to dig deep into my guests, see how their stories
Yeah.
can benefit my audience. So you asking me that now is actually getting me to think,
Yeah.
and if I look back, I think it's not surprising, or I won't say it's surprising that we're now at 1,000 episodes. So the taller that you see at 1,000 is the same one that has been throughout my upbringing. I wanted to become a professional athlete,
Yeah.
like I've always shared, right? And that journey, was very consistent in the pursuit. So I had an argument with my parents. I said, I want to play sports, all this education and all these things. You mentioned sports lawyer
Yeah.
in the bio, and they were like, go to school. When you're done with school, you can do anything you want and all of that, pursue sports, do all of that. And I said, fantastic. That
Deal.
was that was my
So basically,
ticket.
tit for tat.
Exactly. So
What age
I
are we talking about
gave.
here?
So it started when I was like 5,
Right.
right? So they kept thinking he'll grow out of it. He'll grow out of it. He's still young. He's still this. And by the time I was hitting 12, 13, it wasn't going away, right? So they were like, okay, how do we come to a compromise? So that compromise was go to school. When you're done with school, then you can pursue it fully. So it's been the same me since then in terms of being consistent with what I wanted. So the same tenacity with which I wanted to play sports was what I used in pursuing my uh, education, law, and all of that. So nothing ever changed
Yeah.
in terms of what that pursuit is like. So I don't know if that answers your question
It does.
because it's kind
It
of
actually
strange.
does. Obviously, um, look, age 5 is a very young age
Mm-hmm.
to start to have a strong passion for something.
Okay.
But did you have siblings? What kind of house was it growing up?
Yes, I do. Obviously, my siblings, I have a brother and a sister who are twins, and I would actually say that I come from a sporting family,
Right.
right? Because my
That's what I wanted to
sister, yeah,
establish.
exactly,
Actually.
my sister was very active in sports. She ran. I think she played volleyball. She played some football as well. My brother played football. So I think we actually come, and of course, I mean, my dad from his stories telling us how he also played football. So generally, I come from a sports family. My cousin as well, Shay is also an athlete.
Yeah.
He runs. So um,
Is that
that's
something?
basically.
Is that something that your parents have looked at and said, in the end, we actually created this, maybe subconsciously created this, sporting environment because that's where you obviously picked it up from.
Oh, of course, of course. I remember, I think it was a few weeks ago when my daughter Desiree went to see my mom, and she was talking about, so Desiree was talking about tennis, about how she plays and all this and all that, and my mom was like, can you remember when you were around that age? And this is how you used to talk about sports, this is how you
Yeah.
talk. So it was literally like it had come full circle. So yes, of course, they
Yeah.
acknowledge their role in everything in
Yeah.
terms of, hey, he was always after it.
So we established a few things. Sporting background, pretty much. Even though you had to admit it later, but as far as education goes, went to school. Obviously, became a lawyer
Yeah.
effectively. Look, that's a if we're talking about 360s as far
Yeah.
as being opposites and worlds and opposites, law is as opposite as it can be from being a professional athlete.
Completely. I always tell everybody, I was like, what was I thinking, right? Going to study law. Because once I heard that, go to school, once you're done with school, you can do what you want. I don't know why I didn't pick any other thing. And the funny thing I tell people is that when I was in secondary school, I was a science student,
Right.
full science student. So all your further maths, your physics, your biology, think of it, I did it.
Right.
But when I was done and the option to study law came, because my father is also a lawyer,
Right.
it was very easy for me to.
Isn't your mother a lawyer as well?
No, my mom is a doctor.
Right.
All right. So she's a professor of medicine. So it was very easy for me to pick law. But in hindsight, I was not like, why in the world would I pay? Because not only is it a time-consuming course, so time-consuming course,
Yeah.
so 5 years in school, then you do law school, which makes it 6 years. It's also tedious in terms of the attention to detail you need to play. There's so many books to read, so many things to do. So why I chose that till today, I still don't know.
Yeah. Obviously, in the end, we'll still circle back to law. But when you think about it, right, you finish law school, and you effectively don't stop at that. So, and this goes back to your narrow focus. I'm picking it up now because you effectively go into the bar and start practicing as a lawyer, right?
Yeah.
But you mentioned at the start that you wanted to be an athlete, so of course that comes in at some point in time further down the line. We've spoken in private, over the years, and you mentioned, there was a point your parents said, you know what, this deal we had at some point in time, how about you now can actively start pursuing that? So, where did that fit into the law and being called to bar timeline?
Hindsight, they always say is 2020, right? I remember during the period when I was just about to graduate from university, right? I was so excited. I was like, now is the time. I get to pursue this. Unfortunately, that's when I tore my ACL, right? At the wrongest time possible. If I had torn my ACL maybe 2 years before that, I'd have had enough time to recuperate, to go through rehabilitation. And this was a time in Nigeria where you didn't have doctors who could do ACL reconstruction surgeries. So you could only get it done abroad at that time. So, and obviously I didn't know what it was, so I just felt like, hey, my knee is bad. It's really painful. I got tackled in a game. It took months after for me to get the right diagnosis to know that my ACL was gone. I then needed to get surgery. After getting the surgery, rehabilitation was now going to take place, which obviously took me like another 2 years. So the initial plan and initial idea was, hey, finish school, then we dive straight into it. But the injury kind of put a curveball to it. In the sense that,
yeah, was they sorry to cut you, like the injury, did it happen in was this a semi-pro game or an amateur game? Was it a training session? What kind of like?
It was a friendly match.
Right.
It was a friendly match that I honestly didn't need to play at the time. So we're preparing for a tournament, in school, and group of guys came and said, "Hey, how about we just play and all of that?" That's why you see now with professional athletes, even with little kickabouts, park games, they're always extremely careful because anything can go wrong. So it was just a friendly match, nothing serious, nothing on the line. We're preparing for a tournament, and this guy absolutely clatters into me. It's the most pain I've ever felt because obviously I've been playing football for a while. Your ankle niggles, muscle cramps, things like that. But this one was intense that I almost passed out.
Yeah.
And that's why till today, when I see players experience injuries on the pitch and then they bring the oxygen mask, when I hear people say things like, "Oh, what's wrong with him? What are they using oxygen mask?" And I'm like, "Don't
Tell
worry."
that to Victor Osimhen, who was in Lagos,
Exactly. I'm like,
playing a casual game.
don't worry, you can't understand. I literally almost passed out. So the injury threw a curveball into that, which then propelled me to go into law school because I had to undergo rehabilitation. Rehabilitation was going to take a minimum of 9 months, and it wasn't guaranteed. It ended up taking about 2 years, right? So I then used that opportunity to go to law school. While I was in law school, I was doing the rehabilitation at the same time. Right. To then conclude it and then see, okay, is this something that I can still pursue?
Right. So basically, the injury happens between graduation and law school.
Yeah.
I mean, we've spoken a couple of times, and you mentioned, you wanted to go to trials. You were on the brink of, going to the UK and seeing what was possible. How did that pan out? Like, what did the injury change? Psychic, in terms of contacts, tell me how all of that played out.
No, that's actually when I found out the injury was that bad.
Right.
So the minute I was done, next thing, getting on a plane, going abroad to the UK. Okay, all these trials that I had set up, now is the time to get into it. Now, of course, don't forget that I think it was about maybe 6-7 months before then was when I had the original injury. Right. So, I gone to see doctors, I've done x-rays and all of that. Nobody could really figure out what exactly was wrong. But if you rest your body long enough, it appears to feel like that thing is fine, right? So obviously I wasn't experiencing as much pain as I was in the knee, but the ACL was not there. So I went for this trial. I remember it was the first trial that I went for. First trial.
ACL is the knee.
ACL is the tendon that connects your thighs, to your lower leg. So
Right.
it's what allows you turn. It's what allows you make those ziggy zaggy. Not
Right.
when you're running straight. If your ACL is gone and you're running straight, you don't have any problem. Right. It's when you need to turn.
Right.
And of course, you don't play football without turning and dribbling. So it was the first trial that I went for. First one, I can't even forget. I did not last up to a minute in the game, right? Because I got into the game, obviously, I mean, normal joggings and all of that. Then a pass was supposed to come. So I was supposed to pivot off my foot, and then run after the ball. And boom, the knee just went,
Wow.
right? So I obviously couldn't continue the game. The coach of the team was like, what exactly is going on? Because obviously the injury had not been disclosed. Because I thought injury is all gone. I mean, it's been a while.
Yeah. Did you
So,
honestly have an idea that the injury was gone?
well, yes, I
Or you had a
did.
feeling, something is not quite right?
No, I knew something was not right, but having seen a number of people at the time, right, I felt it was gone. Maybe it was just something that had to do with the bone or something. Because what I should have done then was an MRI.
Right.
But the places you could do MRIs were so limited. Maybe it was one or two places or something ridiculous like that, right? And I wasn't even recommended to do an MRI. So which means at the time it wasn't something that was
So,
very,
yeah.
very known and very popular. So yes, I thought it was okay, right? But because if I knew it wasn't okay, then I would have found a way to get better. Anyway, knee goes, couldn't continue the game. Literally 1 minute into the game, I then had to get. So one of the coaches then abroad now said, "Hey, you need to get an MRI, right?" So I go for an MRI. It shows that not only was the ACL gone, there was now bone bruising. Because when the ACL is not there, then it means that both bones, have
Right.
been bruising against each other. And of course, the first thing to recommend was surgery. And because it was so bad in terms of this is, I mean, Wesley Fofana, right, tore his ACL over the preseason.
Yeah. That's the
You're
second
supposed to
one,
do,
no?
yeah, you're supposed to do the surgery, give or take 2-3 days after you had the injury. I was doing it maybe like
8, 9 months.
7, 8, 9 months after, right? And of course, I've been walking, I've been jogging, I've been doing so many other things then.
Yeah.
Whereas you should have had the surgery almost immediately. So, yes, the trials were set up, and of course, that's kind of like what put a kink into it.
Yeah. So, did you have the surgery immediately?
No, so because obviously that game had now made the knee even worse. I needed to wait for the swelling to go down
Right.
again before I could then do the surgery. So that was, say, maybe another 6 weeks or thereabout.
Right.
Yeah.
Then you come back to Nigeria.
Yeah. So I stayed a bit
Right.
to do some rehabilitation. Then of course, I mean, at the time it wasn't making sense because I would have needed to be there for, you know, at least minimum 9 months.
Yeah.
So I did a few months of rehab abroad, and then I came back to Nigeria, which of course is where I met my physio, because it was more or less like a divine encounter, like I call it. She was in Abu Dhabi at the time doing a course on ACL reconstruction surgery.
Mm.
She was supposed to come back to Nigeria, and of course, I mean, who are you going to work with in Nigeria? Because it's an intensive process. So she was thinking as well, like, okay, all this experience I've gotten, how am I going to use it? I was in the UK, right, thinking, I'm coming back to Nigeria. Who in the world am I going to work with for this rehabilitative process? So we kind of like met each other in the middle, and literally that's how I worked with her, got the rehabilitation done. Took roughly about 2 years, obviously because of the damage that had been done to the knee and all
Yeah.
of that.
It's crazy. That is it's such an emotional story. It's almost you have maybe the gateway to your dreams,
Yeah,
and it
yeah.
goes away mentally. Where are you?
No, so I've always been mentally tough, right? And which is one of the things that I teach athletes now. It wasn't, there wasn't necessarily any moment of regret in terms of, oh, this has taken this away, because I always knew that there were multiple plans, right? You talk about, hey, put all your eggs in one basket, watch the basket, yeah. But I always had multiple plans. I always wanted to go into coaching. I always wanted to help other athletes. So when that happened, I still maintained the belief that it was possible, but at the same time, I wasn't like a mental wreck that, oh, my dreams have gone through, I'm then depressed and all of that. No,
Yeah.
none of that.
It's incredible. Right. Obviously, you're married. You have a daughter.
Yeah.
So there's a real you have a different life, so to speak. But let's go back to what's on the bio now. The sports lawyer. So this happens. Of course, you've gone to the bar now, and you've gone into the white collar environment. Do you now start thinking, I need to pivot into something? What is your inspiration to? Do you actually now say, you know what, I'm looking out for law cases or scenarios that would need a sports lawyer, that kind of thing? How do you now become a sports lawyer then?
No, so it's like every it's like every industry, right? So the same way, how do I explain it now? Because law cuts across society,
Right.
right? So you have tech lawyers, meaning that they specialize in tech and all of that. You have medical lawyers
Yeah.
who specialize in medical related issues. You have tax lawyers who specialize. So sports is just another facet of that, which means that you're dealing with legal issues
Mm.
as far as athletes are concerned.
Mm.
An athlete wants to sign a sponsorship deal with whoever it is. How exactly does that pan out?
Yeah.
What are some of the things they're supposed to look out for? Um, an athlete gets banned for doping, right? Something happens. How exactly does
Yeah.
that work
Yeah.
out? How do you know? Because Adam actually reached out to me as well. He had a doping violation, and he needed to respond. How exactly? So that's basically it. So it's just literally law with the target specifically on sports. That's
Right.
about it.
Right. That's amazing. I want to speak to you about, we're recording basically on the eve of the 1000th episode of the Athlete Maestro, which is the nice shirt you have on as well. Hopefully, I could get. I've had one before, but I need to get the
Yeah,
bigger one,
true,
right?
true, true.
But what comes before? Because on your bio as well, there's performance, coach and mindset coach for athletes. Does that come before the podcast and the idea to start creating that sort of content, which effectively is a resource for athletes all across the world? I've spoken to you, in the first year or thereabout, we started recording the podcast. You mentioned, getting emails, far-reaching Netherlands,
Yep.
people reaching out to you, wanting to just discovering something like this for free.
Yeah.
So what comes before? Was the podcast the driving factor to now saying, you know what, I want to be a performance coach, or was that all just the gateway into it? Was it all in your head all the time?
So the podcast was just a medium,
Right.
right? So after going through that experience, going for the trial, knee was bad, had to get surgery, come back for rehabilitation, took so long, made an attempt to restart, but obviously, I mean, age at the time was already gone. And you know how many of these things you have to start young. So the entire experience of what I went through, right? I then kept looking and thinking, what was the resource that could have, been a guide for me from the point when my parents said, hey, go to school, and then when you're done, you can do what it is that you want to do, right? What was that guide for me? There was no guide. There was no resource that I could go to and say, this is how you should approach it, this is how you should do it. Now, we see the established athletes where everybody is at their beck and call trying to assist. This is how you should do it, this is how you should do it. But what happens before you become that elite athlete, right?
Yeah.
So the idea was then, okay, I need to use what I've learned from this entire process to help those that are coming behind me. How was I going to do it? I didn't know at the time, right? So it did take a couple of years before I now realized that, okay, when athletes go to the gym, what exactly are they listening to, right? What are they consuming? The car ride to training,
Yeah.
the car ride home. What exactly are they listening to? And of course, this coincided with, this podcast revolution. It had just started at the time. Now it has boomed and
Yeah.
everybody's having a podcast and all of that. But it just coincided with that beginning point, and I was like, I think this is it. I think this will be the medium to get this message across that, hey, this is how you should approach it. This is how you should do it. I mean, there's an Athlete Maestro page on Instagram, right? And I just post content. I don't really check the messages. I checked the messages, I think it was this year, and I saw a message from a college athlete in the US that has sent me that message since 2020, saying, like, this podcast literally changed my career, helped me get to college, played outstanding, and things like that. And I was like, wow. So the podcast was just the means to ensure that coaching to these young athletes,
Yeah.
got there. And I mean, I can't count the amount of messages from athletes who are no longer athletes now who say, if I had found your podcast at the right time, so maybe a few years ago,
Right.
I would have been in a different position right now. So,
Right.
Basically that was it.
I mean, it's amazing because it's funny. You're sort of like T-Pain. There's a story where he doesn't check his messages and he goes back to the request and sees all the biggest musicians in the world texting him for a feature and stuff like that. When you say a guy like Victor Osimhen, right? Let's speak about put flesh to it. Become a superstar, an athlete. And people say, he didn't need that resource to become a superstar athlete, maybe Africa's first superstar since your Eto'o, your
Yeah.
Drogba,
Yeah.
and whatnot. Where's the link to that? How do you bridge that gap in people's mindsets?
So this is what I always tell people, and I'm sure that for if Victor does an interview, like a serious interview
Mm.
where he goes into detail, there would have been a resource, whether in terms of what he was consuming or in terms of somebody, right? And of course, I had one of the biggest agents in Belgium on the podcast, Sten Francis, and we actually talked about Victor Osimhen's story, about how when he got to Europe, he wasn't fit. He had I think he had malaria. He had a few issues, right? So and I think it was at Wolfsburg first, didn't work out. Went for trial with another club, didn't work out, and then his agent at the time knew the CEO of one of the clubs, right, and said, "Hey, I believe in this guy. I know he has what it takes. Just try him out." And of course, that one says, "Hey, come, we'll give you an extended trial period." They give him the extended trial period, and of course, the rest that they say is history. From not being fit, from being rejected club after club, there's absolutely no way that you don't use a resource.
Yeah.
Right? There would have been something, right? How do I deal with this? How do I handle this? And of course, recently, I think it was a Nigerian athlete, footballer that just signed for Bayer Leverkusen. His name skips my mind now.
Yeah, yeah.
Who, of course, had ACL.
I think that's a Kafo. No?
Is it Victor Boniface or something?
Boniface, yeah.
Victor Boniface, yeah. So, and OJB Sports did like an interview with him where he talks about how he lost his mother, he had injury troubles. There's no way you get through that on your own because you need knowledge of how to cope with that.
So basically, there's an informal resource,
exactly,
so to speak.
Exactly.
Right.
There's an informal resource, and for, like I always say, for every Victor Osimhen that you see, there's so many other athletes who may have been in that position, and it's may, not that they will have been, who may have been in that position if they had the resources that would have helped them better handle pressure, recover from setbacks, recover from their mistake, deal with adversity. Because you've been chasing your dream for so long. I mean, you guys on the Hindsight podcast, you did the interview with Frank Onyeka, right? And you can see from his story as well that it's a tedious process being a young athlete.
Yeah.
You need ways, even if it just means that you keep trudging on, you need ways to deal with all of that to ensure that you don't fall by the wayside. So if one person is able to scale through, think of all the others who didn't have the knowledge of what to do, how to approach it, who of course would have been like, nah, even if they didn't say, I'm not doing this anymore, like it would have just gotten to the point where it just became too tedious for them to continue.
Yeah.
So there would have been something that he was using at that time.
Of course, I want to break the 1,000 episodes down a little bit. We have a nice podcast as well. It's nothing performance, but it's more fast paced and stuff, which is where I look at getting to 1,000 episodes and realize just how difficult it is because you're in the niche business, and if I know anything about the niche business, you have to keep going even when you don't get the applause or the numbers. It's a lonely place to be because the rest of the world is doing scaling up, getting numbers, YouTube views, all that stuff, likes, mentions, but because you're targeting a very specific demographic of people, and we all know the people that make it to athlete level, professional athletes are maybe like less than 1% of the world. So you're literally targeting, the eye of the needle, so to speak. How do you manage in the first 100 episodes? How did you manage not? Because I'm sure you didn't get the messages coming immediately. So how did you keep going? 1 to 100, 100 to 200. How did you keep going and say, you know what? I'm going to reach out to somebody, or somebody's going to reach out. What I'm doing is going to affect somebody positively. Where was the kickback? You said, you know what? Now we're on.
Running the podcast, it's literally like making an attempt to play professional sports as well, right? And what I did, so when it was episode 500 of the podcast, right? I did like a little behind the scenes kind of, and I remember for the first, just like you mentioned, for the first 100 episodes or thereabout, maybe 5 people were listening, right? But like I always tell the athletes as well, if everything you're doing is for the accolades that you're trying to get or you're looking to get, then you're going to be focusing on all these little metrics and they determine whether you continue or not, right? The average podcast doesn't get past 10 episodes, right? So to get to 100 and you still had maybe 5 people, 10 people listening, right? I wasn't even looking at those metrics. The point that I knew was that because I had been through the process, and I think that's the importance of, talking about a message that you have been through.
Yeah.
Because I had been through that process, I knew that there was an athlete somewhere, right, who needed the message.
Yeah.
Whether the athlete was part of those 5 that were listening or part of those 10 that were listening, right, it literally did not matter. And guess what? So there was a Danish athlete, Camilla, who I worked with for a bit. She was into kickboxing and point fighting and all of that. She found the podcast, I think it was at episode maybe 400 and something.
Right.
Or thereabout, right? And the minute she found it, she went back in time to listen to every single episode up to that point. She literally emailed me, right? I think she was living in Hungary at the time. And she said, I went back in time, I listened to every single episode of the podcast, and it literally changed my life. And that was the point where I knew that this was the right approach. If I'd been looking at the metrics, I'd have stopped at maybe 150, right? Because not many people are listening. I'm expending money on this thing. It's free for you to listen anyways, but I'm expending time, money, resources, and of course, you know part of the entire journey as well. So it was just, let's leave the outcome completely, right? What is it we're trying to do?
Yeah.
What impact are we trying to make? And that just led to each episode and each episode and each episode. And of course, eventually the message, not like the messages even, made much of an impact. I mean, yes, it was important that, it was changing the life of somebody.
Yeah.
But the point was that people were now beginning to find it, and it was helpful to them, whether they were messaging me or not.
Yeah.
It didn't matter.
I always say, for every one person that reaches out to you, that's
Exactly.
about 10 more or 20 more people that, don't necessarily want to reach out. They
Exactly.
just want to consume.
But they are consuming and they are reaping the benefits from it and all of that. So that was the whole idea. Nothing about the outcome. It's not like, I remember when we had 100,000 downloads on the podcast. So I think this was a few years ago.
We've got 100,000 downloads.
Downloads of the podcast. Now, if you're looking at it, in comparison to some of the other big podcasts out there, that's like a minute number. These are guys who are having 1 million downloads a month, right? 10 million downloads in a year or something. And then you look at 100,000 downloads, it looks small. But that's because you're focusing on the outcome. The point is that for the athletes who have listened, the 100,000 downloads, whether that was one person or whoever it is, the point is that it was making an impact.
Yeah.
And that was the drive to continue. Not that, eventually it's going to reach 1 million. I'm sure by now, I don't even check the numbers again of the downloads and all of that.
That's incredible. 100,000 downloads, not 100.
No, 100. No, 100.
I'm just trying to make
that. But that's still a small number compared to.
Yeah. But
it's
actually incredible. You had, some notable people, big personalities. Jerry Merritt, played for Watford, American athlete, coaching Supremo, Wayne Goldsmith. And I've seen you speak to these people. How do you? Because if you're a young person trying to make a podcast, I'm thinking, how do you know these people? How do you meet them? How do you reach out to them? Here we would say, where do you come from? Where do you form?
Yeah. So I see that's another thing as well. So one of the things, because a lot of the work was impact driven, right? I didn't get to the point where, I was flustered by reaching out to them. The worst they would say is no, right? Well, I can't come on the podcast. And because I had gotten to the point also where a lot of people were reaching out to me to come on the podcast, and I had to look, do you fit? You find people that they write books, then they want to come on your podcast to kind of like promote it and all of that. So I have to look and see, do you fit into the message that I want to share?
Yeah.
So because a lot of people were reaching out to me, because we're now starting to make a lot of impact, I wasn't fazed, right, by reaching out to these guys. Point is, I'm giving you, whether you want to admit it or not, I'm giving you a platform, right, to athletes who may or may not have known about you. So Jay Demaris literally just reached out to him and I said, hey, I'd love to have you on the podcast. I've heard about your story, because his story as well, very instrumental for young footballers. He went from non-league football, Sunday league football, to the Premiership, right? Which is what a lot of people are dreaming to do.
Like the Jamie Vardy
type story, So, and of course, he saw the message and was like, hey, wow, I would love to come on and all of that. Same thing with Wayne Goldsmith as well. Wayne Goldsmith is a guy who countries are chasing him.
Federations basically say,
he's a guy who, any top swimmer that you see in the world, right? He has had an impact on them. He has worked with them. He has either coached their coach, who now coaches the athlete.
Right.
So same thing, I reached out to him. I said, hey, Wayne, You have a remarkable story. I'd like to have you on a podcast, talk to an African audience in terms of, and he jumped on and it was like, when we finished the interview, he was thanking me for bringing him on. I was like, no, thank you
Right.
for coming on because, like, you're this legend in the world of coaching,
Yeah.
and it's an honor to have you on the podcast. So, again, I wasn't looking at the outcomes. We're trying to pass a message to the athletes, coaching wise,
Yeah.
in terms of how do you become an elite athlete.
Yeah.
And of course, these guys were magnanimous to come on.
It's incredible because people see you bring a real legend in the sport or in coaching, whatever it is, and the key thing for me is when you reach out to them, they do their research. Is this
Exactly.
thing worth?
Exactly.
So that is the place of the consistency and the value
Exactly.
you're creating.
Exactly.
Ultimately, I always say value sort of like attracts value. How do you get a guy like Prof. McWilliams, author of the best, how elite athletes are made? How do you get a guy like that? Because look, it's one thing to reach out to JD Merritt, who's an ex-pro. This is a professor.
Yeah, that was one episode where I think for the first time, I was a little bit skeptical, right, about reaching out to him in the sense that I was like, this is a guy who is, like, I think he has 2 PhDs or something. He was professor in universities. He had written a book. He was, various media publications, and I was like, hey, first and foremost, we have, a body of work in terms of what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
And the worst that would happen is you say, oh, I don't have the time, which I've had, people say, like, I can't come on, I'm busy, and all of that. You have people who will not even respond, right? But for him, I think it was important for him to see the message we're trying to pass across. And it was also important for him to reach a new audience. Like I said, elite athletes, they get all the attention. The young athletes don't really get all the attention. You're seeing a young athlete who sees Professor Mark Williams, has a question for him, and they literally can't reach out to him because I'm a nobody. Like, who am I? Would he even listen to me? But coming on the podcast, right, they can email me their questions, which they've done, because I always share their emails. I'm like, hey, you have any questions for these guys? Send them an email. And these guys have sent emails to them through the conduit that Athlete Maestro has created.
Yeah.
So reaching out to him, it was the same mentality, right? Is that he comes on, is that he says no, right? But the point is, we are trying to extract knowledge from him that then benefits the entire audience.
It's incredible. I always think that first some of the struggles I found, I draw parallels all the time. Sports, music, filmmaking, and it's sort of like the musicians in Nigeria at the time. Nigerian athletes or Nigerian, the audience wanted to consume content from the abroad. What's your mindset towards that? Because I find that if an athlete wanted to do something, rather let's see what the guys in the US are doing, right? But ultimately, as we're seeing with Afrobeats now, it's come full circle. So the guys here are more respected, and the rest of the world is looking for that. As far as specifically thinking about the market in Nigeria, right? Do you feel like you get as much benefits or recognition, because you actually don't look for that, but do you feel like you're reaching the market here more than what is out there? Because what I sense speaking to you is that there's a lot more people listening from outside Nigeria than inside Nigeria or even Africa.
Yeah, I think it's an awareness thing,
right.
And also it's starting to change now, but it wasn't like that at the beginning. How, I mean, we're Nigerian, how Nigerian athletes, they kind of feel they know it all, right? Or they kind of feel that I don't need anybody's help. I'll figure it out on my own. And it always gets to the point where, sports is not like a career in terms of, for example, if I'm a lawyer, if I don't figure it out in the first 10 years, I have the next 10 years to figure it out, right? I have the next 15 years. I can be 70 years old and I can be a lawyer, right? Same thing with medicine. I can go to medical school when I'm 35. I can go when I'm 40. And any other discipline, I can start my first business at 75
so this
or
is
something.
time-driven.
It's very time-driven. So usually what they then began to realize was that time was going. And I've explained this phenomenon about how or why African athletes reduce their age. Is when they get to the realization that I should have done something different.
Yeah.
I should have taken a different path. So because you now want to make up for that time, that's why you now reduce your age. Because if you could take the path from where you were at that point in time, then there won't be a problem, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I now know that this is the path I should have taken. Okay, take that path. But the point is that you should have taken that path at a particular point in time.
Yeah.
So because you want to kind of like, redress the mistake a little bit, that's when you now
Have to.
so it's changing now, where the athletes are now realizing that this is what I need to change this. But it had gone through that process of maybe denial. I like to call it denial, in the sense that, you feel like, okay, this guy is talking about performance. What does he know, right? I'm going to go out there to play. But they've done it for a bit now, and they realize that it looks like it's
probably not going to work.
Yeah, exactly. It's not going to work. I need help, because
Right.
there are three key things we focus on, which is the mental aspects of sports, which is very rarely taught, right? Whether that's Nigeria, whether that's abroad. Then the physical aspect, right? You think you can play the game, right? Okay, what are the physical things that you need in your sport? How do you get them? What is preventing you from getting them? Then strategy, right? I remember talking to a young athlete who was 16, and his dream was to play in the English Premier League. And I was like, what passports do you have, right? And he says, I only have a Nigerian passport. And I'm like, that's not happening anytime soon, right? Because the path to get there, the strategy you need to get there, is something that you have to take. It's not just you sitting down somewhere and saying, hey, I want to do this and I want to get that point.
So mental, physical strategy.
Exactly.
Great. This obviously leads us to a part which is very dear to you, your child, Desiree Ogunlewe. And if you just go below on I spend a lot of time on Instagram. Fabricio did share screen time. I'd like to share my screen time as well. Probably be 15 hours thereabout. But just below your your follow and everything like that, you see marriage. I'm not quite sure. I didn't know you were. I didn't realize that you were. You delved into that.
Share
marriage tips. Desiree Ogunlewe, and the podcast. The Athlete Maestro, and I want to speak about Desiree. Who I'm surprised hasn't come out to
popped out.
To bully us while we're recording today. But look, it's almost like this is now me guinea pigging, my child, right? And I don't think there is a greater test of a resource than using your child to do it. Because people always say, it's not your child. That's why you're you're not the one that has the career. That's why Of course, we know how Nigerians speak about it. But I watched the kid, go from literally, just going to the course and running around. And I opened, her bit on your Instagram and said, today was for practice, but she just wants to play.
Yeah.
So you mentioned you were 5 or thereabout at the time.
Yeah.
But she's not even 5 yet, or she's just, clocked
she's 5 now.
She's 5 now. But this started 2-3 years of it. Like, how do you get into that zone?
So it's an interesting topic that you bring up, and it's one that always makes me laugh. Not necessarily smile, laugh, in the sense that most people always think that because I'm the athlete maestro guy, right? Because I'm the sports performance guy, then I'm the one, pushing and driving, right? The sports angle for this way. And I'm like, all I have done, right, is to create an environment and an atmosphere where whatever it is that she wants to do can flourish. I know, like I said, this was a journey that I went through myself. So literally, I kind of looked at it and I said, what were some of the things that would have been different, that would have prepared me early on, right, for the path that I had chosen, which was, I wanted to be a professional athlete.
Yeah.
So the whole idea of, okay, go to school, when you're done, you do, and, many other examples. And like I said, with my mom saying that, remember how you used to talk like this, and things like that. People always think that, you're the one pushing it, you're the one forcing it, and I always try sometimes, at least for those that are in close proximity, I'm like, come in, and try and see for yourself,
right,
and try and view. The whole idea is that, you see, if you're going to make an impact in sports, right, from the athlete's perspective, there are certain things that you have to do, right? Which is what also led me to working with parents now.
Yeah.
Because I have parents who reach out to me and they're like, my child is 20, my child is 21, they want to play professional sports, and I'm like, time has gone a little bit, right? It's not like it's impossible, but it's going to be extremely difficult, because there are certain things you should have done at that point in time. So yes, it's an opportunity to practice what you preach, in terms of, the message that I'm putting out there, how I'm helping athletes. You can see somebody who is, using it, so to speak, and it's working for them, because the whole idea was, even before she was born, I was like, I give my children the opportunity to play sports, right? And push them in that direction.
Yeah.
So when she was, her first year birthday shoot was a tennis team shoot,
Mm.
right? It was a tennis team shoot. So we were just like, okay, she had the racket and she was biting it and things like that. And fast forward to her fifth birthday shoot, which
Yeah.
was also on the tennis court. And you can literally see the progression from the beginning to the end.
So basically, if I hear you, your job is to provide the bait.
Exactly.
Do you?
Act as a guide,
Yeah.
right? Create the environment, create the path,
Yeah.
and then see what they do with it.
Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, she was at the. I think I saw her at the Wimbledon or something like that. One of
The French Open.
the French Open.
The French Open,
right?
the French Open, yeah.
And it's a bit of a coincidence. We're speaking about tennis now. Obviously, the kid who's just taking over the world.
Yeah.
Carlos
Yeah.
Alcaraz. It's just 20 or 21.
Yeah.
Right. Look, he just beat the world number one Novak. Right.
He's actually world number one, but best of all time.
He's world number one. Yeah,
best
he's
of all time Novak,
literally. And I'm thinking, we have maybe a new superstar on our hands here, right? But that journey, this is what people see,
Yeah, exactly.
right?
Exactly.
You just mentioned parents reaching out to you at 20, kids are probably 21. So there's clearly a disparity in something we're not doing right.
Exactly.
Yeah. So when you take a kid to the French Opens like that, that's not your Disneyland, for example.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So when it comes to sports, and I would employ you and anyone who is listening to this, look at any of your favorite athletes. There was always a significant emotional experience, sports-wise, that literally changed the course of whatever it is they wanted to do. Maybe there was a superstar that came to their neighborhood, when they were 5 years old and they were in awe. Like, oh wow, I want to be like this guy one day. Or maybe there was a, once in a generation athlete who came in, like your Michael Jordans, your Kobe Bryants, where, the young person watched them and they were like, this is what I want to do.
Light bulbs go up in your head.
Exactly. Now, the difficulty we have in Nigeria is that except it is, struggle driven in terms of sports being an outlet, like the road out of poverty, the road to financial freedom, except it is
to avoid crime.
Exactly, or to avoid crime or things like that. Except it is that we very rarely have deliberate situations where, if that is not the case, you have people who want to chase sports, right, and are allowed to chase sports. So those significant emotional experiences are actually key, because what it does is it mimics what happens to many of all these people abroad, where they fall in love with that sport at such an early age that they then begin to drive it.
Was that the case for her? Did you sense that, her being out there at the French Open, was that one of the courts?
Oh yeah. The actual French Open in Paris, and if I wanted any not validation or any proof, right, that we're on the right path, it was working and things like that, it was when, so they have the actual trophies on display, right? And at this time, she was, I think she was 4.5 or thereabout. And the minute she sees the trophy, right, she immediately says, when I'm a big player, I'm going to win this. Not prompted. Nobody said, hey, what is this?
Yeah.
Or what, the minute, and I have that video, like I have it stored somewhere, and where she was like, when I'm a big player, I want to win this one day. So it shows that the experience changed something for her. It connected something for her in terms of, this is a possibility. This is something that I can do. This is something that I can achieve because I enjoy doing this thing.
Yeah. She's got a friend as well, if I'm not mistaken. I see another kid as well who plays tennis with her. But people can listen to you speak and say, probably you're shoehorning her into something. But I remember speaking to you when she was maybe like 2 or 3, and you said, look, she's not gone to a real school, something like that.
Yeah.
So speak to me about the educational part of it, because you had, that, obviously your ACL went away, but you had your law to always, fall back on. What's that side like for her? Was it homeschooling? What was the environment there? What was the approach there?
So it was just picking the right time for her to go.
Right.
So how, and of course it's situation specific. You have situations where people, you want to get them involved in the school system right away or whatever. I mean, it's purely preferential. Yeah. So it was about picking the right time for her to go. And when it was that right time, absolutely she went. So it wasn't anything with that. I did a webinar, I think it was a few weeks ago, where I was teaching parents how to combine academics and sports, because we come from Africa, right? We want to go to school. But one of the things that we don't realize is that school, especially in the system that we are, it is one of the biggest impediments to producing athletes,
Mm.
right? Because if you look at what's the highest level of education of any of the biggest Nigerian athletes that you have out there, right? I'm not talking about those who went on college scholarships,
Yeah.
to the US, which is not very popular, and which is absolutely a good thing. But I'm talking about people who are here, right? Because the minute you make the decision, right, that okay, my child is going to chase an education, which of course this really is as well, you have to be deliberate about every single step you're taking.
Right.
Because
Strategy.
exactly, that's a strategy angle. Because you see schools nowadays, many of them, they don't even have, like, the play areas they have is like, I don't even know how to describe, up until secondary school, right?
Yeah.
So you say that you want your child to play sports, or your child has been telling you they want to play sports, and there's no avenue for them to develop it, right? So nobody's saying they shouldn't go to school, no. But the point is, how do you effectively combine it, whereby you give them a chance to actually succeed in the sports? Because
Yeah.
it's one thing to say it,
Yeah.
it's another thing to actually practice it,
Yeah.
and put things in place. Because if you don't, then that dream is dead. I've had parents who reach out to me and say, "Hey, my child is graduating university now.
So it's time
It's
to.
time to now. It's now time to now pursue."
Yeah.
And I'm like, so the illustration I always give them is, compare your child, right, to their foreign counterparts, right, who have been on a deliberate path since they were 12, right? Some even earlier.
Yeah. Some
Your
earlier.
child is what, 2021? That's a 9-year gap. How exactly are you
How
going
are
to
we
make
gonna
up
make
that
that
gap,
up? Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So the point isn't that, oh, they shouldn't go to school, because our parents would say, so Tola is saying that they should go. No, that's not what I'm
Yeah.
saying, right? They should.
Yeah.
But the point is, what's the plan? What's the
And
strategy?
and you do this webinars on you've done what, maybe 3, 4, 5 thereabout?
Yeah, obviously, I mean, time doesn't permit me to do it as much as I would,
Yeah.
but yes, at different points in time, multiple
Is there a
webinars.
website where there's a website where you can find those webinars?
Yeah, it's the Athlete Maestro website, but it's currently undergoing reconstruction now.
Right.
Trying to introduce some new contents, but yeah, that's when you find when we are having the webinars, when we are hosting it, and of course, for the parents who, they want that mentorship and that guidance. That's something I also do as well, in terms of, hey, this is how you should approach it. This is what you should do if you want to stand a chance.
Yeah.
You can leave it to luck, which is also
Which
there,
also is, yeah, possible,
right?
yeah.
So, and it could happen.
Yeah.
But if you want to be deliberate, especially in the system that we operate, right, there are certain things that you have to do.
That's incredible. Absolutely incredible. I was just, I was thinking about you speaking about, taking Desiree to the French Opens, and the point was, there's a point where there's an emotional connection. I remember watching the Mason Mount video where he was unveiled at United. Him and his father. His father was telling him, "Do you remember when I brought you to Old Trafford?"
So you see,
know,
I didn't even watch that, but you see
and,
what I'm
and
saying?
all of that, and he was like, "Yeah, that kind of thing." So that absolutely, makes sense. Look, 1,000 episodes. What are we doing from here? What's the plan forward?
I think it's just to continue putting the message out there. I mean, obviously, like I said, I'm now busier, but that shouldn't be an excuse.
Yeah.
But it's to continue to impact the life of athletes, right? I feel like we would see so many more athletes,
Yeah.
if only they knew what to do and when.
Yeah.
Right? How to overcome that adversity, mistakes, strategy, a lot of all those things. We would see more if only they knew what
Yeah.
they should be doing and when. Not when, time has gone, and then, they don't want to reverse the clock and things like that. So is to continue putting the message out there, continue collaborations, bring guests on the podcast, look for ways, take the message to schools,
Yeah.
So that, from very young ages, these athletes are aware that, look, there's a physical aspect to sports, there's a mental aspect to sports as well. We're talking about pressure. I remember when this was going to play her first tournament. It wasn't even a serious tournament, right? Like, just like a small tournament, and she said that, I don't want to play. And I'm like, why? She said, I'm nervous, right? And I'm like, that's at the least of the least level. So now imagine when you're going up against the best of the best, right? At that level, when you're 16, 17, if you've not learned to deal with pressure,
Yeah.
you've not learned to deal with anxiety and some of all those things, how do you handle it?
Yeah.
Right? So it's to just continue, create more collaborations, continue to get the message out there. I don't think that, oh, what would 2,000 episodes look like? No.
Yeah.
I just take it one episode at a time.
Yeah.
Just continue to impact the life of athletes, and of course, we'll see where it takes us.
Right. I still have to get a shirt like this.
We'll get you one.
Before we leave. Just as we wrap up, for look, I don't know how you convince, the missus to allow us to come into, because we're literally in your home. We're shooting in your home. So, look, how do you balance all that out? That's just the last thing I want to ask you. How do you balance it? This work, family, Desiree, you're a lawyer. You're traveling a lot as well.
Yeah.
Where do you get the energy from?
That's one question that a lot of people ask me. And there was a parent who I was working with who also made allusions to that. She was like, one of the reasons I wanted to work with you was because I see your life, right? I see how disciplined you are. I see how consistent you are. I see how, and I want that for my child. So that was literally a reason.
Yeah.
So it's funny that you asked that
What's
question
that?
now.
Is that your mom? Your mom is a doctor.
Yeah.
That is a lawyer. What do you put that down to? Discipline.
Well, it's down to the mindset, right? And which is what I try to help the athletes with. You see, with the right mindset, you can do anything, you can go far. It's the mindset that leads to the discipline. It's the mindset that leads to the consistency, right? In terms of, I was talking about it now that 1,000 episodes, I only missed 1 week, and that week I wasn't feeling fine, right? And I didn't prepare enough in advance because anybody can fall sick at any point in time. But in 7 years, 1,000 episodes, I've only ever missed 1 week, right, on the podcast. And that is down to the mindset in terms of, it's not about motivation. If it's motivation, then it means that the minute you don't feel it, you're not going to do it, right? It's about, this is what I've said I will do. This is what I've committed to doing, and I'm going to find a way to do it. So it's priorities as well in terms of what are the most important things to you. I tell athletes this as well. I'm like, you want to have 10 million priorities and you expect to still succeed, right? So the athlete part, you want it. Education part, you want it. Then you want to hang out with your friends. Then you want to start this business venture. Then you want to do... There are too many priorities for you to keep up with, right? So you need to know what's important and when, right? When you know that your mindset is also in place, your mindset is in check, then of course you can then begin to distribute your time accordingly to, okay, these are the priorities I've said, okay, these are the things I need to focus on. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you would hear an episode of the podcast. It doesn't matter. There are times when I've recorded episodes of the podcast the morning they were supposed to air because of time constraints and all of that. But the point is that it will air. If it was about motivation or me feeling it, there's so many times I would not have done the podcast, right? Because I just wasn't feeling it at that point in time. So I would say it's the mindset first and foremost, right? You get that mindset sorted out, you can literally do
you're on the path to it.
Exactly.
Tola Gulewe, it's been a real pleasure. Thanks for having us come into your place.
Thank you.
I want to congratulate you for 1,000 episodes and keep going, and hopefully we can catch up more in the future.
Down the line.
Yeah,
See
thanks very much
where
indeed.
the podcast takes us.
Cheers.